everybody, it's noon. We promised to have you out of here by 12 o'clock. Welcome to everybody on live stream. I want to thank you all for coming out. Before I get into the presentation, I just want to say a couple of things. We know that there are people across campus that are watching from their offices and from our other campuses. I want to welcome them. I would like to point out that at the end, or as of this minute, we've gone live on a website. There will be a Q&A posted on that website. If there are questions that aren't asked here, many of them I think will be answered on that website. And there's a link on that budget website, and I'll give you the web address in a few minutes, that will allow people who have ideas that, alternative revenue generation ideas around cost reduction and the like, so you'll have an opportunity to share them. So I would like to welcome you all today. The objectives today are to give you a sense of what we know, what we don't know, and what the plan is going forward. And you'll realize there's a lot we don't know at this point. But before I really get into it, I want to just have you all think about this province and this university. Over the last 50 years, this province has, with very, very deliberate intention, focused on building one of the great post-secondary systems in this country. The University of Alberta is a top 100 institution. We're in a province of under 4.5 million people. Ontario, with 14.5 million people, only has one institution that is a top 100 in the world. We have done an extraordinarily good job. We have 2 universities in this province that are top 200. We have 2 of the best undergraduate universities in this province, in the entire country. We have 2 of the best technology institutes, and we have a range of colleges meeting needs of students at the college level in major metropolitan areas and in remote areas across the province. And this has been the goal of Alberta. And the University of Alberta has delivered on all of our obligations and commitments to government. We have met our enrollment targets when given, and in most cases exceeded them. We have delivered an incredibly high-powered research and innovation environment for the betterment of all Albertans. And what we're seeing now is a sea change in public funding of all public sector institutions and universities and colleges. I have the honor of being able to travel the province and meet with people in big cities, in Calgary and Lethbridge, in small communities, Fort McMurray, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat. And I think we all know that there's angst out there. There's been angst for years, and that angst is being shared within our university community. And today I want to tell you what we know, what we don't know, and where we're going. So here is what we know. We know that the average Campus Alberta grant was cut by about 5.1%, but it was applied differentially across institutions. Our reduction was 6.9%, or $44 million. We also had a reduction in our infrastructure maintenance program funding. This is what we use for things like deferred maintenance, of $35 million. It went to zero. And what we see is the total reduction this year, in-year budget, is $79 million. We're halfway through this budget year. That's what we know. Now, before we get into how we're going to deal with it, what we don't know, all of those sorts of things, I want to remind us what we aspire to. We aspire to build one of the world's great universities for the public good. That's what we do. We focus on excellence, the quality of our research, the quality of our teaching. If we look forward 10 years, we imagine we're going to have more students, we imagine less space, we imagine less government funding per student, and we see increases in tuition. When we look forward 10 years, that's what we imagine happening. And by the way, this presentation goes about half an hour. We'll have half an hour for questions, just so that you know where we're headed. We've laid a lot of groundwork in the last year or so, last 3 or 4 years. We dealt with our structural deficit. You'll remember how challenging that was, but we got our fiscal house in order. We have developed a budget model that will move to implementation over the next number of years that allows deans to see into the future and get a sense of, if I increase my enrollment, what revenues will I get? If my research activities within the faculty increase, how will that be recognized? We've put in place multi-year planning and accountability frameworks. We have built an integrated asset management strategy, looking at our physical facilities. What do we need? What don't we need? How are we going to manage it? We have launched a major international administrative benchmarking project so that we can learn what the best practices are out there and become more effective and efficient in what we do. We've promoted system-wide collaboration through CAPOA, the Council of Post-Secondary Presidents of Alberta, so that we can take a unified message forward. We have a great reputation as a high-quality institution, and we have very significant opportunities for growth. Many of you have heard the Provost talking about student demand as the oxygen in the system. We are turning away thousands and thousands of students a year that are qualified, that deserve access because of the restrictions or enrollment limits that are in place. Now, a couple of things we want to clarify. The provincial budget noted that we have a $90 million consolidated surplus. That was out there in the public, averaged over 5 years. I want to say this is not cash. It includes a number of things. It includes the growth of our endowment. If I spent that, I would be put in jail. I can't. Employee future benefits. When our pensions moved out of government into the universities, there were these long-term liabilities. As we pay those long-term liabilities down so people in this room and watching on live stream can get their pensions in the future, that counts as a surplus. We can't spend that. Ancillaries. We do not support our ancillaries with any government money or tuition. They have to save the money to replace their roofs. That's included in this. And then it also includes faculty and unit carry forward. So I'm going to, because this is such an important thing, I'm going to ask Gita Kolzecki, our VP Finance, to take you through the numbers. These will all be posted on our website.
Thank you, Dave. These will be posted along with an explanation, some explanatory notes to help you understand it. So I'm just going to point here if I can, and hopefully everybody can see me. These numbers come from our audited financial statements. So this is, if you calculate the average of these numbers here, you come to the number that the university used. So let me walk you through a little bit of what they used. So all of this here is all related to endowment gifts and capitalized investment earnings. So the idea of endowments being you are allowed to spend them only for the purpose for which they've been given, and you have a spending allocation, and our idea is to grow the endowment value over time to preserve intergenerational equity. That's the whole idea. So all of this is related to that growth. In fact, of that 90 million, it's 55% of it is related to endowments. So then I also want to talk about these other numbers. So this is our operating surplus. So they've used the total including endowments. A few words on our operating surplus. So you're going to see those same numbers on the next slide. So at the very top, those are the numbers. They come out of our audited financial statements as well. So Dave talked about the fact that if our obligations change on our benefits, employee future benefits, this must be reflected through our income statement, and that's that impact. Ancillary services, we expect ancillary services to operate on a break-even basis. We expect them to generate their own money because there's no operating money going towards them. We expect them to generate their money for doing capital improvements, and so managing their own affairs, and so that's also been included, and you'll see the numbers there. To the extent we provide allocations out to faculties and units each year of certain budget amounts. To the extent that the faculty or the unit chooses not as part of their planning, they don't spend the full allotment, maybe they're expecting a new researcher next year, maybe they need to do a lab renovation or whatever it is, to the extent they don't expend all of their budget that we allocate, that appears as a surplus. And that's what this next line is. And as you know, we've had a practice that we do not touch those carry forwards. We allow those units and faculties to do the planning that they do, and so we don't touch that. So when we remove all of that, what have we got? Well, that's what we've got. Now, this is also a source from which we make capital expenditures. Yes, there are other sources. We get specific capital grants from government for doing specific things. We also get donations to help us, but some of that has to come out of our operating income, and you can see net of the amortization, that's what we actually did in those years. So these are actual figures. And we also make contributions, it's not nearly as significant, but towards internal research projects and or endowments. For example, if this is a real example that happened in those years, someone gives us a bequest. Well, we've chosen, that faculty chose to take that bequest and create an endowment as a result of that. And so that's also in these figures. So what's left? Well, actually, if you do the math on what's left, it's a slightly negative number. We expend those amounts. So as I say, you'll see some information with some explanatory notes up on the website whenever today.
And the province of Alberta is the only province that in the consolidated books shows the consolidated surplus in this way. So it's important to realize when you see a number pulled out without context, it's not cash in anyone's pocket. Another thing I want to clarify, many of you have looked through the McKinnon report. There are some interesting observations in there. Here is one that plots full-time learning equivalents versus total expenses. And there you can see the University of Alberta way out there. It gives the impression we are just spending money and wasting resources. If you do the analysis and say, well, where does that money come from? Well, this is how much comes from the government in the Campus Alberta grant. The difference between those 2 points is return on investment. This is leverage. This is money we get from other governments. We generate through ancillary fees, through tuition, through corporate sponsorships. What we've done over the last 6 weeks is working with our board, we have taken this figure and other data into cabinet ministers, into deputy ministers, into those people involved in decision-making to let them know that figures like that don't accurately reflect the financial picture at the University of Alberta. We have a greater return on investment here at the U of A than any other institution in the province, something we should be incredibly proud of. So what are the things we still need to learn as we go forward? Well, we haven't got a detailed budget letter. Usually we don't get those till after the budget is passed, which would be probably sometime next month. We've been told we're going to get it earlier, which would be very helpful because that will include the actual numbers. We do not know what the future enrollment targets are. What flexibility are we going to have? Clearly it won't be right across the board because government has always controlled programs like dentistry, medicine, nursing, teacher education, those types of things. But are we going to get free rein in the arts and sciences, for example? We don't know that. We don't know what the magnitude and implications to cuts in research may be, given the budget changes announced last week. We don't know the budget impact on clinical services and how they will flow through to the university. We also, over the last few days, have been aware of new legislation that makes some very significant changes in labor legislation, and the implications or the statement that the Minister of Advanced Education can set bargaining mandates for negotiations within our sector. And we also have been informed that going forward, starting in the 2020 budget, the government will have a new funding formula based on performance metrics as they go forward. We don't know what that will look like. We've been told we'll be consulted. And fortuitously, we chose performance-based funding as the topic for this January's Board, General Faculties Council, Senate retreat. So we're actively engaged in looking at models and what they may or may not do. So what are we doing this year? We've got an in-year budget cut. Well, the university, the center, will buffer what we can. So for example, we have already canceled, I think, about $10 million worth of infrastructure contracts. So that big cut that we've got in infrastructure, we've been able to back that off quite a bit. We'll be going to the board and making a case to take some of our investment reserve and to help with this year. We anticipate that before we start allocating any of the cut, we hope to deal with about half of it this year before it moves out into units and faculties. That is our goal. What is important to note is that we have another budget coming up in a few months' time, in February more than likely. The reductions that we move out into the faculties and units will be viewed as one time, and then the assumption will be, based on what we learn in the coming budget, which basically will reset our base funding, we will then incorporate any ongoing cuts into base at that time. Any reductions will be differential. They won't simply be across the board. If we look at some of the things we're going to have to consider going forward, the government has set a target of decreasing spending within post-secondary, within their envelope to post-secondary, into the ministry, over the coming years at about 12.5%. We don't know what enrollment is going to be and what options we are going to have. We are uncertain as to the nature of the performance-based funding in future base budget Campus Alberta grant allocations. We have been given tuition flexibility for the next 3 years. What they have said is that in each of the coming 3 years, we could put tuition up on average 7% in each of the 3 years, with no program going up more than 10% over that time. Now, as I said in the State of the University address, I've said many, many times, we cannot expect our students to bear this burden alone. We have made a commitment that a meaningful portion of incremental tuition rate-derived revenue will be put into needs-based student financial assistance so students with the highest need can get the financial support they require to come to the University of Alberta. I want to be clear on that. You're going to hear me say that many, many times. And we have to be very, very conscious of the impact of any changes in tuition on our students. Steve, what I'd like you to do is, if you can just spend a few moments talking about what we imagine going forward, just to give everyone a sense of what the transformation might look like.
So as Dave says, there's lots of variables out there. So this is just a back-of-the-envelope calculation to give us a sense of what magnitude are we looking at. And the major impacts that I'll talk about in this calculation are going to be the Campus Alberta grant, the loss of infrastructure maintenance funding, as well as the offsetting impact of a tuition increase. Now, this is not including the set-aside, so it's an overestimate of the benefits. But we don't know what's exactly going to happen to the Campus Alberta grant. The document that the government released last week doesn't have in it a line that says the Campus Alberta grant will grow or decrease by any particular amount. But what it does say is that the post-secondary operating expenditures will be projected to decrease in a particular manner. And that manner is a decrease of 5.1% in the year that we're currently in, and then roughly 2.5% in each of the subsequent 3 years for a total of about 12.5%. It's a bit of a leap to go from that statement to say that that's what our Campus Alberta grant will do, a total decrease of 12.5%. But we're supported in that assumption by the fact that that 5.1% that the budget talks about in year one is exactly the number that they did on the Campus Alberta grants across the system. So if that is a good indicator of what is going to happen to the total amount of money available to the system, and if we assume further that in the new funding model, our relative slice of the total pie remains about the same, then 12.5% decrease in the amount of money that we're getting from the government will look like about a $94 million cut. Now, that's at the end of a 4-year period. Assuming that there's no replacement of the IMP money that was cut this year, we'll still have to do those infrastructure projects. We know how large our deferred maintenance is, so we'll have to factor a number on the order of about $35 million just to keep our buildings from crumbling around us. And then putting back in some money, assuming that we follow through with the tuition increases as the government has laid out, that gives us a number that looks on the order of about an $87 million decrease in the total amount of resources that we have available, assuming that we don't do anything different in terms of enrollment, et cetera. If we were to just amortize that across our student numbers, that's a cut of sorry, let me just go back to that raw number. That number represents something on the order of about a 12 to 15% cut on our operations, depending on what component you take as the denominator in that equation. If we divide that out by our number of students, we get about a $2,500 decrease in the number of dollars that we have per student. And that's important because, Dave, if we go to the next slide, a number of you might have seen this slide presented over the course of the last year as we've had some discussions about where we as a university rank in terms of our per student revenues, operating revenues, amongst the U15. And we're not allowed to share all the names of the U15 institutions, but their numbers are up there, ranked from the institution with the most dollars per student, which is us, down to the bottom, which I'm not allowed to tell you who that is. What we see, that the reason I put that number on the previous slide, how much does the decrease impact us per student, is just to be able to do some comparison. What is the impact of this cut to us on a per student funding basis? And what you see is it moves us from the top of the rank to about number 3. So we still have significantly more resources per student than most institutions, certainly a lot of really good institutions that we would recognize, which gives us some confidence that we're going into territory that if we learn from others who are already have frankly gone down the road of cuts, if we learn from them, we can get a sense of how do we deliver still top quality programs with a few less dollars on a per student basis.
Important thing to realize about this is, as Steve says, we can learn from our colleagues that have gone through similar challenges in restructuring. We would be the last of the provinces to be faced with something like this. But having said that, pain and stress are not relative. You don't look at others and go, well, they're way down here. This makes me feel much better. So I want to acknowledge that we have some challenges ahead. But what it does is it certainly gives me confidence that when we come out the end of this, we are still going to have an exceptionally high quality university, one of the finest in the world. So what are the options that we need to consider when we deal with these very real, very significant reductions? Well, we're considering everything. In the long term, administrative restructuring and efficiencies, revamping the curriculum and structural changes. As a routine measure, we terminate programs frequently. And it's quite common, and that will continue. That's part of what we do at the university. We talked about tuition and the importance of putting money into student financial assistance. Enrollment will be a big tool for generating revenues to replace some of that shortfall. And what we're doing is providing the new budget model provides deans and faculties an opportunity to see what are the budget implications if I go forward and increase enrollments. And then it allows for that planning into the future. How would we have to structure our curriculum in a way to deal with this? We're also looking at alternative revenue streams. A major one is the desire to develop our property trust and to start developing some of the real estate holdings we have so that they can actually generate revenue. You look at what's happening at UBC and SFU, they're generating tens of millions of dollars a year that support the quality of the academic environment. Calgary's was given a go-ahead on their trust years ago, and we are pushing government to allow us the opportunities. There are a couple of things we've ruled out. When we look at, one question I've been asked a lot, are there going to be, retirement incentives? We've gone back, and over the last 2 programs here at the University of Alberta, there have been no savings generated. The money put into it equaled the money that came out of it. We went to the Educational Advisory Board in the United States and asked, what data have you got? They work with 1,600 institutions across the United States. What they showed is if you have an early departure incentive, there's a short-term gain, but very quickly those gains are lost. Things have changed dramatically in the last decade and a half. Back in the 90s, retirement incentives worked because there was mandatory retirement. People that were in their 60s saw that there was an end coming, and a retirement incentive made sense. What we see is since that time, there have been no apparent successes with a retirement incentive package. So I want to say that very, very clearly. We've talked about growth. Growth can help us deal with some of these financial pressures. It can also help deal with the big challenge that we've got in the province of Alberta in that the system is turning away, by the ministry's own estimations, close to 20,000 qualified students a year. And we know that we have the fastest growing youth population in Canada. So if we imagine going forward, seeing more students on campus, how are we going to prepare ourselves, the systems, how are we going to manage an increase in international students? Government has been quite clear. They see international students and growth in international students that pay full fee as a key opportunity going forward from both a financial point of view, but also from an immigration point of view into Canada. How do we maintain the exceptional learning environment in this changing scenario? And as I've already mentioned, the importance of student financial assistance. Just a couple of notes on enrollment demand. Our demand is growing dramatically. This is the number of applications from domestic students. If you look at what's happening in high schools right now, there is a tsunami of enrollment pressure moving through the system. It's at about grade 9 right now. It's going to come crashing down on us in a few years, and that curve will show an inflection point going upward. If we look at what's happened over the last few years in international enrollment demand here at the University of Alberta, just for undergraduates alone, you can see it is growing quite dramatically. So there is potential to grow. So last slides, where are we? Well, we know what our vision is of building one of the world's great universities for the public good. We have some huge strengths. We have incredibly strong faculty who attract amazing students. We have good facilities. We've got growing research success. Our programs are in very high demand, and there is very strong future demand. So here is the website that we've just made live, uab.ca/budget. There is a place on there to click if you've got ideas for reducing spending, finding efficiencies, generating revenue. Please provide them. We want to hear your ideas. We also have a detailed Q&A up there. If you've got questions that aren't answered, send us a note and we'll take a look at them. And there is a detailed explanation of the budget surplus. so that when people are out there going, well, the government says there's a $90 million surplus, why don't they just use that? You will know how that surplus is calculated and what it means. So with that, I thank you for your patience, and as I said at the beginning, we wanted an opportunity at this stage to tell you what we know. We know a little bit. What we don't know, there's still a lot of things we don't know, and I've given you an indication of the plan going forward. So, over to you. Questions, comments? Kevin.
Well, thank you for that, Dave, for that explanation, and Steve. I guess this question might be more directed to Steve, and that is the new budget model that was planned out and starting to come on board with internally. I guess the question is the nexus of that with these budget cuts. And can you give us an idea of what maybe at least thumbnail description of a philosophy that Central and the deans might have in dealing with these cuts in the context of this new model?
Let me start on that. I'm sure that Geeta and Dave will have other points to add. But so really see the budget model as one of a number of different tools that we've been working on to help us make sure that we are putting we're investing our resources in exact alignment with our mission, so that we are here as an institution to do great teaching, great research, and let's make sure that our dollars are going directly behind those two functions. And so it's an activity-based model, and the drivers in the model are those two activities, teaching, research. It is unfortunate in some ways that these two are coming together in that it becomes difficult to understand what the impacts of one might be in the presence of the other. So that doubles the challenge that many of us will have in just working through all of the pieces. And that really comes down to one of my functions, my office's functions, is to help support the deans in understanding what all of those different pieces are. But in terms of, is this the right time to roll out a budget model? I think there is actually no better time as we re-examine every cent that we're spending and making sure that it is going directly towards helping us move forward our key mission. So the budget model is a net neutral mechanism for distributing resources. That means that there will be some faculties that get some more resources out of it than they had previously. Some will get less, and that will be layered on top of the cuts. So for some, it's a double whammy. For others, it becomes a bit of an offsetting set of factors. No doubt that's a complexity that we probably could have done without, but we're also looking at other levers that we can be throwing at the same time, so it really does become a complex set of things, and it's really important that we've got great financial insights and management at all levels of the organization as we kind of pull all these pieces together.
And the other, I'll just add to that, and then we'll move on. The important thing is that we don't just switch over to the budget model. It's going to be phased in over a number of years, and we will be evaluating as we go along. Yes?
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was nice. And I think the province and the university, we have similar problems. The province is trying to balance the books. The effect is passed on to different institutions, and we are included. Looking at the financial things that we have, there are some places that we could borrow some money within the institution and use it for some other places for the meantime. And in the future, we could balance it back. The other thing I was thinking is, as the province passed it down to us, can we also pass it down to subunits of the universities to come up with strategies where they could manage what we have pending the time that we're able to balance everything up?
So let me parse the question. Part of it is, can we run short-term deficits and then pay it back over time? The board will be considering all options. I don't think there's anything that has been put, in terms of that, has been put off the table. In terms of the capacity for units to respond, the answer is to your question, yes, definitely. Different units, all units will respond differently because of the unique nature of the unit itself. What the history department can do is very different than what is required in, say, in surgery or something like that. There will be revenue opportunities, and one of the things that our role is to make sure that in certain areas where there are clear imbalances, there might be some reapportioning of resource. And that's something that we will be watching very, very carefully. I think one of the biggest question marks for us is in the area of international enrollments, which could be a very significant revenue source, but it's not evenly distributed across campus. So how would we manage that effectively? It's something that we'll be paying a lot of attention to as we go ahead. Adam.
Hi, thanks very much to all three of you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could sort of touch on some more details around this student financial aid piece that you were talking about so if tuition were to go up at the same time that we're facing cuts to the Campus Alberta grant, sort of how you see the allocation of funds into a student financial aid system versus everything else that is going to have to find funding elsewhere.
Well, I'm not going to turn it over to you, Melissa, so you don't have to worry. Our registrar, Melissa Padfield, is currently out looking across the country, looking at different models so that we can go to the board with a rational explanation for the decision we ultimately make. What we do know is from some institutions that have managed increases in tuition and that have tracked the socioeconomic background of both applicants and registrants, that if they deal with student financial need appropriately, they are able to, they see no change in the socioeconomic background of students. The challenge, of course, as a scientist, the biggest challenge I have in a leadership position is I'm used to doing experiments, where you do an experiment, but the most important part of the experiment is the control experiment. You can't do a control experiment in real life. You make a decision. And so what we're doing is we're out there looking at other examples, and then we will use that to make the decision. What is the number? Is it 10% of the incremental tuition revenue that goes to need? What is it? And we'll try and have a rational explanation for why we chose it. But I can't answer that specifically now, Adam. Yes, Donna.
I read the paper today, and in there they were saying that Grant MacEwan University has been given a deadline to provide the government with their plan for what they're going to do to absorb the cut. So I'm knowing again how directive the government has been around our freedom of expression, that there was a deadline and what they expected. Is the U of A underneath something like that as well, too, a deadline to provide a plan for what we'll do for maybe this year or over the 4 years?
We have not received anything in writing. We anticipate there will be something where government says, okay, so what are you going to do? It would actually be hard to imagine them not knowing or wanting to know what we're going to do. So we're awaiting some form of communication, and what you've seen is our plan to date in terms of how we're going to go ahead. But any sort of long-term plan, until we know things like enrollment flexibility, all of those things that I went through, we just don't know. And this is one of the challenges. When we wanted very much to bring the community together and have this conversation, it would be nice to be able to answer all the questions, but when you realize 3/4 of them or 80% of them we can't answer yet, it's very difficult. But we're expecting some form of communication that would ask us to update government on what our plans are.
Hi, Elizabeth Johansson, NASA President. Thank you for the presentation. And I wanted to comment that a lot of people out there are really worried. They're worried about what's going to happen to their jobs, what the plan is going to be going forward. And I know that I've heard from you that you recognize and value the work that support staff do across the university in so many different roles and so many different jobs to support the mission of the university and the teaching and learning and research that goes on here. And sometimes what happens in budget cuts is there's a knee-jerk reaction, and support staff often feel like they bear the brunt of things. And if you could maybe comment to folks about that you do value the work that they do, and maybe if you're able to give some reassurance that it is a complex situation and it's not going to be just a knee-jerk reaction.
Well, as I said in the State of the University address, we will not act reflexively. We need to think this through. We will be working with the deans and with the unit leads to do everything we can to ameliorate the effects of these reductions on job loss. I know people are anxious, and but Elizabeth, you've got my assurance that what makes this such a great university is the great people, the great staff, the great faculty, the great students. And you and I both know that every year we're laying people off. We've got so many. We're a huge organization. It's part of the way things work. It would be unrealistic to assume that reductions of this aren't going to involve some dislocation. I need to be clear, and I think everyone recognizes that. The decisions will ultimately be made at unit levels, where units work to decide how best to allocate their resources. One of the things that we're saying to the deans, we said to the chairs when we met with them yesterday, is we must think through everything we do very, very carefully. And that's why I began and ended on the long term. This is a great university. We've been around for, what is it now, 10 years, 111 years, and we're going to be around for another 111. This is a bump in a very long road. It's a big bump, but it's a very long road, and we will come out of the end of this, and we will be a great university. But we will think this through carefully, and that's why we're trying to get as quickly as we can to that sort of 4-year planning horizon, so that we can think through how do we manage that. And if we are going to grow enrollments very significantly, we're going to probably manage it quite differently than if we're not. And these are questions that we need to ask, and that's one of the strategies that, okay, this year we're doing one time, but the base will flow in next year, and we've got a lot of questions to answer between now and March. Yes?
Hi, so my name's Katie, and I'm an education student here on campus, and then I'm also on student council representing all students, but specifically ed. So I understand that we have to make choices, but I feel like students feel that they are bearing the brunt of these cuts because tuition will be, and particularly international students. So how can it be justified to students that tuition is going to increase while their financial aid is going to be decreasing?
So we will be increasing financial aid here at the university. CAPOA, the Post-Secondary Presidents of Alberta, has been lobbying for increase in needs-based student financial aid at the provincial level. And I think this is something that we can make common cause with the student groups, and I know, working with Adam and Akanksha and others, we are at item that this is a priority going forward. This is a broader issue than just the University of Alberta. It's the province of Alberta and the province and the need for the province to also put a priority on student financial assistance. Yes.
Hello, my name is Charles Blond, and I'm a counselor here. I just wanted to ask you if there's going to be a decrease in funding in programs for the transition year program, because that's a vital resource for Indigenous students. And my second question, is there going to be a specific tuition and SFA specifically for Indigenous students?
Two very important but very specific questions that literally at this point I can't answer. The transition year program is something we're extraordinarily proud of. This is students from the Indigenous community that have maybe the aptitude but not the marks or course background to make it into the university. They get to come here and over a transition year build up their background so that they can transition. And likewise, the question about are we going to do a set aside on student financial assistance focusing on Indigenous students, that will be something that we would be considering. But I can't give you a specific answer. Yeah.
I just have a follow-up question.
Sure.
So if we're increasing financial aid through the university for students, what steps are going to be taken to ensure that unclaimed financial aid still gets given to students? So unclaimed awards and grants.
Let's register. We'll take you right down to the grassroots here.
First and foremost, we make an effort to allocate all financial aid that's available to us, and that goes through a series of offers that go out to students. When we have unspent aid, that's typically because students decided not to come to the University of Alberta, and then that's rolled forward to be allocated to students in the following year. So we make every effort based on what we know are traditional uptake rates from students when we offer aid to make sure we offer to the limit of what we're able to. So the notion that the university has a lot of unspent aid is actually erroneous. We allocate all of our aid out in offers. That doesn't mean it's always spent because students make different decisions about their academic pathways. So we will continue to make sure that any changes we make in aid are reflected in how we do our offering to make sure that all the money that we have set aside for students makes it to students to the best of our ability.
Hey Dave, it's Luke, Vice President Operations Finance for the Students' Union. My main concern here that I wanted to bring up was obviously with the $35 million cut to the IMP grant that is going to continue to pose future issues with deferred maintenance, something that's been talked about for a while. Students use both the academic and non-academic spaces across the campus, and so I'm kind of wondering what plans in the future do you have if that grant continues to be cut back or removed altogether as it was this year, as it's going to continue to impact students. And I don't want to see a future where our buildings are crumbling down around us, or that we decide to cut back on non-academic spaces in order to maintain the academic spaces across our campus.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And Steve, in his little back of the notepad calculation that he showed, what are the implications of all of this put together? The assumption was that that is not being backfilled and that we would have to step up and use operating funds to cover it. So I'm glad to hear you in your position saying that this is important. We have a huge deferred maintenance challenge on this campus, and one of the things that you would have seen up there is that we can start rationalizing our space, and we are pulling, consolidating services. We used to we lease space about $1.2 million a year, I believe, Andrew, from campus over in Campus Towers. We are moving those units back. We'll be saving $1.2 million a year on that. I think in a few weeks we're taking down Alumni House, which we've decommissioned. The asset management strategy and the budget model, which puts a notional price on space, will reward us for being efficient. And that will allow us to get out of some of these old buildings that are so run down that we don't really need anymore if we use our existing space as efficiently as we can. But that doesn't mean there aren't other spaces that need retrofitting. And just a week or so ago, we took our Board of Governors through the chemistry building, where deferred maintenance, it doesn't sound like it affects students. It sounds like, well, that's just, pipes in the wall or something. We took them into new chemistry labs that were retrofitted with the recent federal funding and provincial funding, and then right next door into ones that weren't. And what we're trying to do is have people in our community understand this is not some abstract thing that doesn't matter. This affects the quality of the learning and research environment for everybody. So thank you for that. We're down to the last couple of minutes. I've got a few things I want to say before we wrap, but yes.
Thank you. So international students came up today, particularly concerned about cuts falling on the backs of these students. International students use a disproportionate number of services. That's certainly true in our service. So if we're bringing in more numbers at a time when we simultaneously have service cuts, what precautions can be taken to ensure that admission standards are not reduced and that we actually have adequate services to support any substantial growth in the international student population.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at international enrollment as a tool to deal with some of this, there would have to be set-asides for the services required. And we already had a discussion on Monday with the deans, and the provost raised that very issue. So there's no question about it that we would have to put some resource, or relatively more resource, so to speak, into the services that those students would require. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. We said we'd have you out of here by 1. What we wanted to do was give you a sense of what we knew for sure, what we don't know and are trying to figure out as quickly as we can, and what the emerging plan is for going forward. There are a lot of unanswered questions out there, and we are working hard to get answers to them. And we will be updating our budget website as often as need be over the coming weeks and months to keep you posted. If you have questions, there are on that website ways to get them to us, and we encourage you to do so. But let me come back to where I began. This province we're undergoing a sea change. Over the last 50 years, we have built a remarkable post-secondary system, and this university is a truly world-class institution that's recognized across the country and around the world. And we've done that in the quality of our people, our students, our faculty, and our staff. Our commitment to our mission is paramount. So anything that we do going forward we will be keeping our eyes on that long-term horizon. What are our goals and objectives of a university? We will have to make changes. We will see reductions in grant funding. We will most likely see increases in enrollment and increases in tuition. We will be making all our decisions in a very thoughtful way. We will go through some challenging years, but we will come out of this as a great university. We will continue as a great university, and we'll do that because of the quality of the people here. So I want to thank you for coming today. I want to thank you for your questions, and we will work very hard to keep you informed over the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thank you very much.